What if I told you there was effectively a treatment that could heal you up from mild traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, and get you over heroin addiction and alcohol addiction? You'd probably say, Dave, you're out to lunch, bro. But the reality is Ibogaine treatments and 5-MeO-DMT seems to be doing some incredible things for our veteran community. And today I talked with Trevor and Gord. These two individuals are huge advocates for getting Ibogaine treatment and 5-MeO-DMT into the veteran space and have been helping veterans for years get over their addictions and solve their mild traumatic brain injuries and make sure that their PTSD doesn't lead to the ultimate demise of themselves. This is a really cool conversation between the three of us. And if you're curious about psychedelics and their power and how you can gradually start your process into the healing journey, which I've started myself, then come join us here on this conversation and make sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and help grow this channel so more veterans just like yourself can start the healing process after 20 years of war. Let's get into it. Hey folks, as you may have seen, I just got back from a BJJ and healing retreat for veterans put on by David and Cordy from Becoming Ohm, a husband and wife team doing incredible work for veterans' mental health. But my involvement with them actually started before that. I've been working with them in their online coaching program for the last 3 months and I'm already signed up for 3 more. What I love about this program is that it meets you right at where you're at. You don't have to fly to Mexico or go sit in the jungle to start healing. They help you make real changes in your day-to-day life while teaching you how to work with plant medicine in a safe, intentional, and grounded way. This isn't some weird hippie stuff, but like a legit way to improve your mental health. For me, it's helped me stay more present with my family and respond better in situations that used to set me off. They've worked with over 100 veterans, first responders, and civilians in the last couple of years. If you want to learn more, go follow them on Instagram at becoming.ohm and shoot them a message with the words hard to kill. David will hook you up with all the info plus a special offer just for listeners of the podcast. Becoming Ohm has been a huge part of my journey and I know that can help you too. Even if you've been let down by everything modern medicine or Veterans Affairs has to offer you so far. My new book, Harden to Fuck Up, was written as a guide for anybody that follows the podcast and wants to put together all the things that they've learned from amazing guests. It is Dallas Alexander approved. Tim Jensen from Grunt Style wrote the foreword. And if you want to lose weight, you want to get a grip of your health, your waistline, and your mental health this year, I strongly recommend going to Amazon and getting your ebook, audiobook, or paperback copy immediately. Would love to hear a review and train hard, fight easy. Let's get back to the episode. All right, folks, sitting down with 2 really cool guests today. I've got Trevor Miller and Gordon Hurley. Trevor is part of Ambio Life. This is a leading organization in the psychedelic therapy space that's doing powerful work with Ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT. 2 things that I'm not well read up on, so it's going to be a really interesting conversation. There's going to be a lot of learning going on. And if that sounds familiar, it's because Ambio was the team that first introduced Sean Ryan, like the Sean Ryan from the Sean Ryan Show, to the world of psychedelics. So Trevor's been a guest on the show as well, which I only put 2 and 2 together like a few days ago. I'm like, oh shit, that's the guy I saw. I think it was like 2 years ago, Trevor, that you were on the show talking about psychedelics, which kind of opened my eyes to the world of psychedelics as well. And he is going to share his mission and how this can revolutionize mental health for first responders and veterans. He's also the chief operating officer and co-founder of Ambio Life Sciences. He's a social entrepreneur and an Ibogaine advocate. Trevor brings over a decade of experience of supporting individuals through addiction recovery, trauma healing, and post-treatment integration. His background includes co-founding the Canadian Psychedelic Association, which we definitely need to talk about because I didn't know there was an association, serving as the chair of the board for MAPS Canada. And he's also co-authored peer-reviewed research on Ibogaine applications for trauma, TBI, and opioid use disorder, and has been featured in award-winning documentaries, including Dosed and in Waves and War. Very cool stuff, man. Very cool bio. And Gordon. So Gordon is here as well. He's a 15-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. Spent half of his career in the Canadian Light Infantry Airborne Reconnaissance Patrolman MOS, which I didn't even know existed, man. So maybe we'll have to discuss that. And the other half as a special forces operator and joint terminal attack controller with Canadian Special Operations Forces Command. It sounds very cool. You have to explain that to me too. His deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Africa earned him multiple commendations, but also left lasting physical and psychological wounds. After surviving a suicide attempt and years of silent struggle, Gordon became a recognized advocate for veteran mental health, psychedelic-assisted therapy, and post-service recovery. He currently serves on the Canadian Special Operations Regimental Association, Heroic Hearts Canada, Project Life Spark, and Treble Victor boards. The CEO of the All the Way Factory, Inc., Gordon uses design and storytelling to connect, empower, and help save the lives of fellow veterans. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. It is a lovely Thursday here in Montreal. I hope it's beautiful where you guys are at. And we've got a lot of things to cover today. So, Trevor, I wanted to start with you. On the Sean Ryan Show, which is one of my favorite podcasts, hands down. I wait for the episodes to drop. I saw your episode years ago. And like I said in the intro, kind of sparked my interest in psychedelics. I've subsequently gone on, and I literally just got back from a week of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and microdosing psilocybin, which is my intro to psychedelics, which is was for veterans and first responders in Mexico. So I'm just starting to enter into my psychedelic journey. We did some breathwork stuff, and maybe we can get into it later, but I had an insane experience. And if that's just a taste without even taking a strong dose of psychedelics of what to expect, then holy shit. But that being said, you mentioned something on the Sean Ryan Show, which I thought was really interesting. You referenced Tibetan warriors coming back from war and experiencing a level of enlightenment that changed their society, which is relevant to what I think is going on now with our warriors coming back from 20 years of the global war on terror. So let's start there to frame the conversation about why is it so important now that the veteran world, first responder world is starting to kind of awaken and using psychedelics as that tool to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting. The time Sean Ryan came down to get treated, I just happened to share that anecdote that I had heard about Tibetan Buddhist society and how essentially what it is that some kings became interested in Tibetan Buddhism. And it was one king in particular that then shared Tibetan Buddhism with his soldier. And I guess it was once the soldiers got on board, then all of society followed. So Sean asked me to speak about that first on his podcast as well. And he gave me a heads up. So I was able to quickly make sure that was actually the truth. And it is the truth. And I think I kind of see it happening, whether it's not necessarily with Buddhism, although maybe if you look at somebody like Tu Lam and what he's putting out in the world, that's got more of an Eastern flair. But even Sean Ryan now getting into Christianity, and so many of the other soldiers who have kind of come into Christianity as well and been very public with their spiritual journey, I think that's really impacting a lot of people. So yeah, it's pretty wild that these warriors who, because of the nature of their business, can also become societal influencers, then start a trend, whether it's towards psychedelics and healing or into kind of more regular spirituality. It's amazing to see that happening. And if you look, you see it happening everywhere.
Yeah, you're right about that. The first time I spoke to anybody about a psychedelic experience was my buddy Ryan, who I'd known for years. He was really candid about what he experienced with an ayahuasca journey. And he was like, bro, I know this sounds crazy, and then he went on to explain his experience. And I'm just sitting there kind of listening to all this. And I know he's not crazy, but he's like, it was reality. And I was getting spoken to. And I went on this journey and I was just like, wow, that's wild. And so that kind of sparked my interest. And now it's just been, small baby steps at a time.
Yeah.
And then it was really, I only realized how, I guess, widespread this was when I went down to the Military Influencer Conference in Las Vegas, and I got to meet a bunch of American veterans. Me and my business partner were the only two Canadians there. And just random conversations. I would say like one out of every three conversation ended up talking about some form of psychedelic treatment. And I couldn't believe that a, quote unquote, more conservative community, like the veteran community, was going down this route, which in my opinion was more hippie liberal shit, right? Like peace, love, and happiness. And so that started to shift my focus away from, well, these drugs are more for the hippie kind of free love crowd, which was my interpretation growing up, to more of a, oh, this is like a healing medicine. This isn't just some like random recreational drug that people are doing. These guys seem pretty normal to me, and they're saying it healed them from addiction. It healed them from PTSD. It healed them from TBI. So now my eyes are a lot more wide open, and I just got back from my own week-long retreat in Mexico last week, where we microdosed psilocybin and did BJJ and had a lot of time to kind of reflect and think about things. And so I'm slowly going down that path, and I feel so much better. And it's amazing just with that little bit of treatment where you can start actually expressing things like joy. So it's really cool that there is a historical reference to soldiers coming home. Fellas, bring it in. Nice and tight. Bring it in. Nice and tight. We need to talk about it. All right. Seriously. We need to talk about something that most of us don't want to talk about. That's why I put on my nice blue dress shirt to bring a bit of seriousness to an often hilarious topic. But your sexual health is no joke. Seriously, though, sexual health needs a lot more attention than it's been given. Let me go over a few things here. Research has shown that regular sex, 1 to 2 times per week, can reduce the risk of cardiovascular mortality by 50%. Bring that one to your wife right now. Lower the risk of prostate cancer by 33% and reinvigorate your mind and body. The problem is 40% of men in their 40s, 50% of men in their 50s, and 60% of men in their 60s experience some form of erectile dysfunction. This is even worse in the veteran community. On top of all this, erectile dysfunction is correlated with a future cardiovascular event and is an early warning sign of a future issue. This is why Dr. Elliott, board certified urologist and friend of the podcast, has created this one of a kind, first in its category, revolutionary device called the Firmtech ring. This high-speed tech for your dick will give you real-time data and allow you to see how many nocturnal erections you get every night, which can be a great bit of data that you can bring to your doctor for a future conversation. Not only that, this data could literally save your life. You know, I'm all about improving the health and lives of the veteran community. And that's why I've paired up with Dr. Elliott Justin to provide you with a 10% discount if you head to the link that's here in the description to get yourself your first Firmtech tech ring if you use the code DMorrow at checkout. So head to the link in the description and start tracking so that you can start banging. All right, brother. So go do what you got to do and be one of the first to bring a whole new meaning to being hard to kill.
It's amazing. Just, the hippies knew it worked. Even if they maybe didn't on a therapeutic level, they knew psychedelics are good for something. But that's been the amazing thing, even in my almost more than close to 15-year career providing psychedelics professionally, to see now this conservative turn towards psychedelics. I think it's epitomized by former Texas Governor Rick Perry being on Joe Rogan. January 3rd was the episode, and him talking about how he really wants to dedicate the rest of his life towards Ibogaine because of what he's seen. Yeah, when I always say, or have said in the past, that, these guys, imagine the millions of dollars invested into each one of these hard charging special operators. And when they start coming to the table and say, look, this is something you really need to look at because it's the one thing that actually helped me, I think that gets a lot of attention. And yeah, that's what we're seeing. It's really an issue that can cross aisles, as it were.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct on that. I mean, you did mention the religious aspect as well. Traditional conservative values, there's usually some religious appreciation there. And I think for myself anyways, I definitely had a religious experience last week. And not being too close to my faith, I can see how a more powerful experience could really bring you back to a more, if you want to call it, conservative way of life. But I don't want to label it in terms of politics, because this seems just more like a human way of living where you're more connected to something greater than yourself. And I don't think that has to be a conservative or liberal type thing. It's a human thing. So I think we're getting closer to a natural way of being, whatever that means. I'm not quite sure. But that being said, Trevor, how did you get involved in this Ibogaine world and this psychedelics world?
It started for me, yeah, it was kind of part of my spiritual journey, actually. I was raised Christian, and in my late teens, I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm like, how are these adults believing this fairy
These
tale?
fairy tales. I did the
Yeah,
same thing. I just like, get this out of here.
yeah. And then there were a
Noah's Ark,
few,
come on.
yeah. Then there were a few teachings that kind of hit me in my early 20s that opened me up again. And I just started looking for what was similar between all religions as opposed to what's different, which everybody seems to be expert on what's different between religions. But I started looking at what's similar, and there's a lot that's similar. And that eventually brought me back to Christianity. But at a certain point in this seeking, I'm like, well, why am I doing this seeking? Well, you want to be happy. Well, what does all this say about being happy? Well, it seemed like the happiest people, or the people I most wanted to emulate, seemed to be helping a heck of a lot more people than I was at the time. So I didn't like this hypothesis. I didn't know what that meant, if that meant becoming a social worker or something. But I thought it was a valid hypothesis that it would feel good to truly help people. So I was new to Vancouver at the time. I was born in Kitchener, moved to Whistler in 96, moved to Vancouver in 2000. And after 9/11, that's when I really got serious about doing what I could to help the world. Turned my attention to Vancouver's downtown east side and just started poking around down there, seeing if there might be a way to help that neighborhood. That basically turned into about a 10-year networking and research project. In 2009, I had a meeting with Ann Livingston, who started the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, which has done a lot of good down there. Told her I was just looking at ways to help, and we had a great conversation. We couldn't really think of anything for me to help out with until the end. I just mentioned there had been a binder on the wall behind her, and it said Ibogaine on it. And I said, what about Ibogaine? And she said, actually, I have people calling me for that all the time. There was a former Ibogaine clinic on the Sunshine Coast that had shut down, and her number was still on the website, though, as somebody to call for information if people were looking for information. So I said, let me follow that thread. And I found a supplier of Ibogaine. I gave it to a couple of people out of the gate, not knowing at all what I was doing. I'm glad nobody got hurt. And yet the phone kept ringing, kept telling people, look, you should just go to Mexico, basically. Here's what little I know about it if you are going to do it yourself. But from what I've heard, you don't do it yourself. And then in 2012, I was invited to an Ibogaine conference in Vancouver by that same woman. Told me there was a conference in Vancouver, and she put me on the list as an Ibogaine provider. And that's where I met Jonathan Dickinson, my current business partner. He was running that conference. It was also where I was introduced to my now former business partner, who had been apprenticed with people in Mexico on how to give Ibogaine. I basically had this sales funnel coming to me still. He was really interested in providing the medicine. It was legal to do so in Canada at the time. So we set up my first business providing Ibogaine called Liberty Root Therapy Limited. And from 2012 through until 2017, we treated about 200 people, mostly for opioid use disorder. Ibogaine's very good at getting people off of heroin and the like, which is why it made sense for the downtown east side. And then Health Canada changed the regulatory status of it in 2017, so I couldn't work with it there since. But there's the answer to your question on how I got started.
That's really interesting. It sounds kind of serendipitous.
Definitely. I would think, as that, speaking of the spiritual journey, as I was seeking my way spiritually, there was a lot of praying where I'm like, God, I know my life can be of use and of purpose. I have no idea how that's going to happen, but please show me the way. And I feel like I basically played the long game on the law of attraction towards how I could help the world. And it took a decade, but I kept at it. I had a job as a cruise director on cruise ships in the middle there. And I'm sure I'm the only cruise director that's ever sailed the seven seas while taking notes about how I might help the downtown east side. So I just really kept at it with all my, all my mind, all my soul. And then, yeah, the invisible hands step in with synchronicities that seem to lead the way. Countless stories of synchronicities I could tell you, including I got married in 2009 to a woman I met on cruise ships, Becky. She's fantastic. She was very supportive in me following this path. And in 2009, after I had a job on land, I was a bit settled. I said, all right, I'm going to go back down to the downtown east side and start poking around, see what I can do to help out down there. And on that first day back, boots on the ground in the downtown east side, I'm walking past the safe injection site on Hastings Street. There's a vacant lot next to it. And I look behind the vacant lot, or I look in the vacant lot, and I'm like, what's that? And I walk in and I'm like, are you guys having a sweat lodge right now? And they said, yeah, do you want to join? So all of a sudden, I'm reinitiated into this project in the most visceral way possible, doing a sweat lodge on the downtown east side. And 3 days after that, I had the conversation about Ibogaine for the first time. I can also say that, I had a history of psychedelics. I'd been exposed to psychedelics and plant medicines in the past as well.
It takes a special kind of human being to do a sweat lodge in East Hastings. So
I got really sick afterwards. That was crazy. I was sick for 2 days afterwards. I haven't been sick after a sweat lodge before. I don't know. And I've heard it said that when a healer truly finds his path, they get sick for a little while. So who knows,
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
I did a Temescal last week.
Nice.
And holy shit. Oh man, that rocked me. And I've done sauna before. It's not that I haven't been in the heat. It was just the darkness and the humidity and the chanting.
The noise.
It was so powerful.
That's what we do at your place.
Yeah.
Right?
Everybody does a Temescal the first day they get here as well.
Oh my God. That's like the most bonding experience too. Before you go in, that sets the tone for the entire week.
Insane stuff. So you've done the East Hastings Sweat Lodge. Is this something that I can go do? Like, can I go find it?
No, it's never there. It's the one
TripAdvisor. Is it a TripAdvisor thing?
Yeah,
like a
it's
tour,
the one time I've seen it. Like, I've never seen it since. I had never seen it before. It's just,
wow.
I didn't have a car then. I took the bus down to Hastings in Maine that day, and I ended up in a conversation with a guy about psychedelics and ayahuasca on the way down there. And he was talking about a documentary he was in, which turns out to be The Jungle Prescription, which was a Nature of Things documentary featuring Gabor Mate using ayahuasca to help addicts. Gabor Mate eventually became a close friend. Like the coincidences and synchronicities have been mental on this path. I actually did you can find it on YouTube. I looked at it yesterday because the guy was looking for advice, so I sent it to him. But I did it 9 years ago. And if you search on YouTube, psychedelic entrepreneurship, Trevor Miller, there's a presentation I did there that basically touches on all this stuff. Like, what I define psychedelic entrepreneurship as is psychedelic means mind or soul manifesting. Entrepreneurship, of course, taking up an undertaking. So psychedelic entrepreneurship is how to manifest your soul into a business. And this talk I did at a psychedelic conference is all about that. And I touch on, basically, you have to know what you want to accomplish. You don't have to know how. And then you have to watch for the invisible hands to get involved and bring you along in your path.
I totally agree, man. Carl Jung's work on synchronicities and there's no such thing as coincidences, when I learned about it, blew my freaking mind.
Yeah.
It was one of those topics that there's every moment in your life, and you have to be aware that it's happening, and then to like lean into it and realize this isn't just random. This is the universe giving you signs, and you have to listen to them and follow them. And once you can tap into that power, you become next level. And for your business, yeah, absolutely. My business is all based off of that. I never should have been here. I was an infantry grunt and a high school science teacher. This is really outside of my realm. But I started just listening to these random little itches. There's just, hey, you should start. I've always wanted to start a business. Okay. And then I started a business the worst time possible. I was unemployed, wasn't working. And then I get on a phone call with a random dude from LinkedIn. Turns out the guy's a veteran from the UK. Starts talking. I'm cracking up. We're having a blast. I'm like, I'm sold. Where's the conference? He's like, it's in Spain. Okay, well, all right. I guess I head to Spain. And then all the connections I made from there all led me to something new, and it allowed me to grow this thing. And essentially, this is where I get to talk to you and talk about synchronicities, which is really, really interesting. Okay, so there's also another thing I wanted to bring up too. You talked about you were looking for happiness. There's something I learned years ago, and I can't remember where it came from, but I've looked it up. There is some validity to it. The Germans back in the day, when somebody would come with depression, they likely didn't even call it that back in the day, but they had a case of the Mondays or the blahs. They didn't know what to do. They're talking to their doctor, and that's when doctors actually talk to you. They would say, well, you need to go help the first person that you find that needs help in your family or community, and then come back and see me in 2 weeks and tell me how you feel. And inevitably they would come back, because this is before SSRIs and anything like that. They would come back and say, hey, doc, actually, I feel a little bit better. Oh, what a surprise. Because we intuitively know that once you actually externalize kind of your ability to help, and you're not just constantly in your own head, you can actually empathize with somebody else and start bringing them to a better existence. That's like the fundamental reason why I think we exist, is to be in a community that helps each other and helps each other grow. And so you found that out by going out and saying, like, man, I really need to go, help somebody, and I need to help the community. And so you did a sweat lodge, and then little by little, you got closer and closer to where you wanted to be in that space, which is really cool. So now Ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT. I don't really know what they are. We're talking about psychedelics. Obviously, they have psychedelic effects, but what are they? And, how do they differ from other psychedelics that are on there? I mean, you mentioned that there's the effect of being able to come down or get off of opioids. What other effects or what other benefits would Ibogaine have for somebody that would require treatment?
Yeah, so Ibogaine comes from a plant in Africa called Iboga. This plant has been used ceremonially for centuries by a tradition that calls themselves the Bwiti tradition in Gabon and Cameroon, kind of West Africa. And it is the root bark of this plant that is used in these ceremonies. And they use it for initiation, they use it for healing. And in the early 60s, a gentleman by the name of Howard Lotsoff, who was addicted to heroin at the time, his chemist buddy knew that he would try just about anything. He said, I think you might be interested in this stuff I happen to have in my freezer. Gave him some Ibogaine, which is one alkaloid out of that root bark. And he took it, not knowing what he was getting into. He went on this powerful journey. It can be anywhere from a 24 to 36 hour long trip, and had no idea what he was getting into. He took it on the way to his psychologist, spent way more time on his psychologist's couch than he was planning on. But when it was all over, he realized, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. And Howard became a real champion for this medicine. He started knocking on doors. He formed the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, which set up some standards of care. And that's ultimately how it became known in the modern Western world. There was also a medicine, there was a prescription medicine in France in the late 1800s even, early 1900s, called Lamborghini, I believe it was called. And it was basically a microdose of Ibogaine that was taken, and it was ultimately outlawed in the middle of the last century in France as well. But and then so that's Ibogaine. It was generally discovered as an anti-addictive compound in the early 1960s, and then a whole bunch of Ibogaine clinics opened up starting in the 80s and 90s. And it was mostly used to treat opioid use disorder. But recently, it's been discovered that it's one of the most fascinating compounds out there and seems to be helping people with a lot more than just addiction. PTSD type symptoms it seems to be addressing, and incredibly, and why it seems to be so great for veterans, is traumatic brain injury as well. So we finished a study with Stanford University that did brain scans before and after that shows in a lot of these guys, Ibogaine, just one dose of it is reversing traumatic brain injury in a lot of these guys.
Whoa, wait, hold on a sec. Say that again. One dose, so like one 24-hour long kind of trip is enough to start healing the TBI damage?
Yeah, so the Stanford study was 30 guys, special forces veterans that had a traumatic brain injury. That's what they needed in order to get into the study. They went to Stanford prior to coming to Ambio. They did brain scans and a battery of other tests. They came down to Ambio for just Ibogaine, just one dose like we do in our 5-day protocol. And then when they didn't have 5-MeO-DMT, we were just looking at one signal. They went back to Stanford after that, immediately thereafter, flew straight back to Stanford, had more brain scans, had more tests. A month later, most of the guys went back for more brain scans, more tests. And the pre-brain scans are clearly showing traumatic brain injury, which shows up basically as a dark spot in the brain where there's not enough blood flow. And then after the Ibogaine, the brains on most of these guys are just lit up all the way, even more than an average person. One of the guys, he described his Ibogaine journey as shallow and long. He didn't really have a powerful psychedelic journey, not a lot of visions, nothing like that, which you don't necessarily need for Ibogaine to work for you. But he said that he had been living feeling as if there were 3 knives going into his brain, almost like knives going into a butcher's block. And he said that at a certain point in the Ibogaine journey, he felt those knives be removed. And he said he felt his whole brain relax inside of his skull. And he went back to Stanford, had his second brain scan, came for his month follow-up, and the radiology tech is not really supposed to show anybody their brain scans, but this guy's pretty influential. And he said, hey man, I really want to see my brain scans. Let me see my brain scans. And the guy goes, I'm not supposed to show you, but yours are so dramatic. Let me show you. And his pre-brain scan showed dark spots in those spots where he felt those knives in his brain. The post-brain scans, 0 dark spots.
This is revolutionary.
It is.
And I didn't realize that it had this profound an effect, because, I mean, traumatic brain injury in the forces is pretty ubiquitous, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of how big the problem is. Having done some work with Concussion Legacy Foundation here, the Canadian Armed Forces is barely getting to the point where they're even aware that they need to look out for their troops when it comes to, blast waves and concussive forces. And then on the backside, when you're a veteran, the idea that you may have a mild traumatic brain injury that's causing PTSD-like symptoms is not, it's not even being tracked right now. It's not even a conversation. So the fact that there is potentially a cure for traumatic brain injury, and it's natural and not created by a pharmaceutical company, my mind is starting to race right now, because that is a groundbreaking discovery that could have massive impact. Because in my opinion, I think we're, the suicide epidemic in the veteran world, it's not just a mental health crisis. It's a toxic exposure, traumatic brain injury. Like, there's so many comorbidities in there. And if you can just knock down one of them, which is traumatic brain injury, and just eliminate that off the table, I think you would reduce your suicidality probably by 20, 30% in a relatively short amount of time. This is huge news. So this is really exciting, man. I had no idea. And this study is published, like you can find it online.
So Ibogaine seems to have become the Ibogaine clinic, or pardon me, Ambio seems to have become the Ibogaine clinic of choice for veterans because of the relationship we have with the nonprofit that sends a lot of these special forces guys down here. Plus, our relationship with Sean Ryan, Marcus Luttrell, a lot of these guys. So it's not only the Stanford study, which is incredible, but we just see it again and again and again. Like, these lives change incredibly. The paper that's been published so far with the Stanford study is a paper that was published in the journal Nature Medicine. It is not a neuroimaging study. Those are still to come, but I know the people involved in the study, so I've heard of the results neuroimaging wise. But the paper that's been published so far, Nature Medicine is one of the preeminent medical journals out there, and it measured PTSD, depression, anxiety, and disability scores all went from almost off the charts down to next to nothing after Ibogaine. And we're still in touch with those guys. And most of them don't even qualify as having post-traumatic stress disorder anymore.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
It's not from lack of trying either, Dave. Like, I went down 2 years ago, so I've briefed the Veterans Affairs Minister, the previous one and this one now combined like 4 times. And every time I talk about Ibogaine. So it's not from lack of trying. You'll see, it's probably a whole nother podcast, but I've seen your conversations before with like what our society view of the military is. And it's one of those things where this is a direct example of the support for our military, is that there is no funding for it. Whereas in the States, they're very patriotic and they're willing to step behind these people, give them charitable funds to go. It's not like that in Canada. It's not. It's a difficult scene to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, in your case, Gordon, obviously you had a 15-year career, spent time in special operations. Is TBI something that you had to work through as well when you got out?
Absolutely. I had a IED explode on my face in Afghanistan in 2009.
Oh, shit.
It laid me up for 3 weeks. Yeah, I had surgery and calf. And jumps. People don't think, everyone thinks jumping's just jumping, even skydiving, but a hard opening with your parachute opening, with all your gear on, all of a sudden your head's sloshing, your brain's sloshing around. Every time you jump at night, you're not landing it standing up like a cool guy movie thing. You're most likely thundering in. And then we lean into a subconcussive blast wave injury. So hard infantry paraposition for 15 years. Doesn't have to be special forces, but if you're running a range, you're RSO or you're a safety staff and you're standing next to a guy who's he shoots his 3 rockets, but you're standing there for an entire course length, then 30 times 3, you're looking at 90 Carl G rounds going off beside someone's head, you know what I mean, throughout a day, which is normal, or it was normal. Those aren't the things that we're focusing on. And there is a good point. So CANSOFCOM was able to muckle on to the head doctor for Veterans Affairs and really put it to her to say, we need to get this TBI, subconcussive blast wave injury, sorted out right away with a table of disabilities. And that was released yesterday. So anyone that's
get out of here.
Yeah, anyone, I can send it to you after, but anyone who's in a high performing or high risk occupation of traumatic brain injury, including subconcussive injury, will be able to get access faster to a completed application. Like, I've had a TBI claim in for 3.5 years and it's still not done. And like, it's not just all the things I just said, but I literally have bond mix all over my face. Like, and it's taken me this long to get to an endpoint. So they're making it forward, but it's only with these kind of conversations where and you have to be very careful in Canada, because you can't complain. In the military, I got it on my system. You can complain once and then people are not going to talk to you, or they're going to turn it off and they're not going to listen. So it's like this dance of just gently leading these people towards these alternative therapies that are extremely effective, in which Canada should be a global leader on. We have such progressive ideology with everything. You can have 2.5 grams of opioids, heroin, fentanyl, crack cocaine in BC, and you'll get a card that says to the nearest rehab center. It's not about playgrounds. You can already have that. So how can you have 2.5 grams of crack, but we're not even going to explore alternative therapies that are meant to be non-addictive?
Right. Right. So with that being said, that's its own podcast, right? The whole concept around the open free market of, hardcore drugs here in Canada, which is a very progressive idea. It clearly is not working. There's a lot of tweaking that needs to get done. But to your point, if you can do that, then all the psychedelics, in my opinion, should be fair game. I mean, and the hypocrisy is they already did open up plant medicine to veterans. I can get $1,000 a weed every month. What am I going to do with $1,000 a week? Honestly, it's a lot of freaking weed. I can't use it all. So
they're missing the assisted therapy portion of it, and this is another critical thing I brief them on all the time, is that you're sending guys to go get people to go get ketamine treatment, but they're taking an hour GO train into Toronto, then getting on a bus, then going to a mall in downtown Toronto, getting hooked up to IV ketamine, getting pump filled drugs, tripping out, then getting unhooked by the nurse, and then salute, sayonara, getting back on a bus in a busy city, getting back on a GO train after that to go home.
Oh boy.
How that is the exact opposite way of how, this is Gord's opinion, of how we want to treat people with psychedelic assisted therapy. And like both VAC ministers are like, what? I'm like, yeah, man, that's not a part of it. Like, there needs to be guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from what I've heard, what I've learned, and what I've experienced, the psychedelic aspect of healing requires a community, because I was in a community of 12 folks last week, veterans and first responders. And there was an energy that you just can't replicate on your own. I wouldn't feel comfortable tripping balls in my basement if I didn't have somebody to guide me, because I would have, honestly, I had a full-on psychedelic experience without using any sort of, high concentration of psychedelics, just through breathing. If they hadn't have told me the things that are going to happen during that experience, I would have thought I was having a stroke. I would have thought I was just losing my mind. So that being said, you came to the medicine, but I want to know, how did you get to the point where you're now an advocate for Ibogaine? What was that journey like for you?
The proof was in the pudding. I do believe community greatly enhances people's chance of success for whatever they're looking for. But I also believe that you can crawl yourself out of whatever hole you're in yourself. You can do it. You can totally do it. It's way easier with a community, but I'm just putting it out there, because while I had my mental health struggles, probably the highest point of like operator syndrome, we'll call it, in the military is when I was suicidal and had a suicide attempt. And I continued soldiering at the highest levels of our military for like 4 years. And that was one of my coping mechanisms, was suicidal ideation and just very messed up way of thinking. So I had a close friend accidental overdose. And I said, if I was reading a book in Mosul, and I was reading, it was Tools of the Titans, and I was reading about all ayahuasca, 5-MeO, DMT, and like, I've done a lot of drugs, and I haven't heard of these ones. And then they were talking about psilocybin, and they were talking about the therapeutic use to it, and I was like, oh no way, because I always would feel so refreshed after doing a magic mushroom trip, and I'd feel my perspective was better on the world and blah blah blah. And then I started reading, and the data started coming out, and I knew that if I had a child and they were addicted to drugs, I would kidnap them, pack them up, bring them to whatever, at that point, Mexico, Peru, all these exotic locations. I wouldn't care. They're coming with me, and then we'll figure it out on the other side. Yeah. Well, fast forward about 4 years later, and I'm out of the military now, and one of my closest friends, he's extremely suicidal, and it was going up and down and up and down, and I reached out to different organizations, and I ended up talking with MBO Life Sciences with Trevor, and I forced him to get a line of credit and take him down there. And I knew you have to do this stuff for yourself too. I didn't go because of him. I did it for myself, but he needed that immediate help. And this is a twofold way of where I was on my path of healing was further along than a lot of guys that go when they're super in the middle of it, still in the thick of it, getting destroyed, suicide, all the bad stuff. I had some perspective on it. I was out and a little bit of time. I still had a lot of issues though. And the Ibogaine trip was not visual the way the way other guys have it. Definitely some weird stuff going on. But I knew with all the research that I was doing in my veteran advocacy space around psychedelics that, like, okay, if this does what it's supposed to do, which is Gordon layman terms, is create like your brain to be malleable and open to having new neural pathways, then that's the benefit of the Ibogaine. I'm not looking for a psychedelic trip from it. I was just like, okay, if this is supposed to do what it's supposed to do, then that's all I care about. The 5-MeO DMT, I'll speak about that, and then I'll go back to the Ibogaine. The 5-MeO DMT was the ego dissolution for me, and it was one of the more profound experiences of my life. I inhaled it. I smoked this 5-MeO DMT, and all I saw was war images. And it was like the beginning of an X-Men movie where it was just scenes like, and all it was destruction. All it was like the worst stuff that's ever happened in my life. War, everything. It was just all negative. And I remember I had my hands clenched so hard beside my body. And I was saying, like, let go. And like I said, I've done a bunch of psychedelics, so I'm okay with surrendering and letting it go. And I almost died, so I'm okay with like saying, okay, let it go. But it's hard on these big drugs. It's very hard to surrender and let go, but it's important. And I kept saying, let go. And I finally said it. I felt like I said it out loud. I was like, let go. And I let go my hands, and all the imagery stopped. And it was a little boy, like a 5-year-old boy on the ground, holding his knees, just so scared, looking at me. And I knew, like, my body's covered in goosebumps right now. I was looking at myself. I was looking at a scared little boy, and I knew all the tattoos, all the special forces, all the killing, all the almost I got killed. I have a big truck. All this posturing meant nothing. It meant nothing. It meant I was a scared little boy who was using all these things to guard myself. And every single other person in the world is doing the same thing. And everyone's just a scared little person who doesn't want something bad to happen. And oh my God, I asked Trevor, I just asked him for a hug. And I was doing a lot of volunteering with at-risk youth at the time. So a lot of things were lining up where it was acceptance for me. And I thought I was a good person. I'm not a bad person. And not a lot of men in the special forces are bad dudes either. But you're only around alpha men for 15 years or alpha personalities. When you get out, like, the world's filled with people. If anything, we're the very small minority.
Yes.
And so it was a huge acceptance of just like, yo, let it go. Like, it's all good. Everyone's just trying to make it through. The Ibogaine, I came home and I did cognitive processing therapy right away. I never have done a formal course of psychedelic or of psychology treatment, therapist treatment. It was always just panic, like, oh, I'm going to kill myself. And I discussed all this with my psychologist before I went down. And this was the plan, because if the drug makes your brain malleable, the most important time is afterwards. So you instate all these good habits, 21 days to build a habit. And then the power of the Ibogaine, it's so strong of a psychedelic that it allows you the breath instead of that constant push of like, you want alcohol, or you're scared, or whatever PTSD hiccup. Instead of that compulsive feeling of it goes to there, it's not there. It's a very neutral feeling. It changed the way I eat. It changed my taste buds. It changed so much.
Shit.
But the biggest thing is that I was doing the cognitive processing therapy where you have to rehash intense, stressful moments of your life and diagnose it, go through it. There's a whole structure to it. I was able to do that with the things that were so triggering to me that by the time, I think the half-life is like 3 months in your body or something like that, I was so diligent. I didn't drink. I journaled, I meditated, and I did this therapy. And that was the true benefit of Ibogaine for me, is that now here I am 2 years later. And does it still upset me? Sure. Can I let it go fast? Yes. Can I rationalize it in my brain that, hey man, maybe it's okay you feel that way, but it ain't changing shit for you in your life. So, and I could never have done that before without the Ibogaine. So
Wow.
the dual concept, the Ibogaine wasn't crazy visual life changing, but I knew that if it was going to do what it did, it would work, and it did.
That's incredible. Remind me, how long ago did you take?
Would have been 2 years ago in January.
Okay, so 2 years ago. And would you say there's, like, the point you are now, would you say that there's a requirement to do another Ibogaine ceremony, or do you think you're pretty much at the homeostasis now where you can function without those, panic thoughts, those suicide ideations? What's that like?
And has your
Of course.
relationship to alcohol changed at all since then?
It did. That's the only thing that's ever stopped. And like you said, about the way that I've heard it word was that, like, if you invite it back in your life, and I did, and it still is my dark passenger. Like, I'm not going to lie that it is a struggle, but instead of hiding it from myself and shame spiraling and not owning it, I have the perspective, and I am now at a point in my mental health journey where I'm like, whoa, I respect the power of an addiction. And the only time I ever had the space from it, of the feeling of it, was from Ibogaine. And the feeling of the addiction never came back until I was like, yeah, okay, I'll try a drink. And then that turned into like, okay, I'll have a drink here and there. And then months later, it turns into like, okay, well, I had a bad night on Friday. And it's like, you kind of get back into the same pattern. So it's a double-edged sword. Those questions are very loaded. And because the medicine is a very personal thing too. Like, even when I left there, I felt like I knew I wanted more. And that's strange to hear, but I've done a lot of psychedelics, and I felt like it opened a pathway for me where I was like, whoa, I could go deeper. And it's hard to talk about like that because everyone wants this this pill, right? This thing that fixes it all. And it's not fair to just sum it up like that. So if people need to go multiple times, then they have to go multiple times. If someone's going multiple times within a short amount of time, I would be more concerned about like, hey, what's happening in their home life and what changes aren't they making to make this effective, not necessarily the drug itself.
Yeah. Well, you did mention earlier that, you felt you're a little bit further along in your journey than some of the other folks you knew. And I felt that too at some point, like especially last week, where you can see where you were in somebody else that is just getting started, because it is a journey, man. I mean, we don't learn any of this stuff growing up. At least I didn't, about how to address those negative emotions. You were talking about, feeling like a little, you're just a scared little kid, like understanding that that's within us, and it's okay to connect with it, that it's okay that, you may feel fear. It's okay that, you're struggling. These are things that I didn't know I could do, because I just wasn't brought up that way. So it's a total re-education. And it seems like the medicine is just able to speed that up a little bit more and give you the clarity. And, Trevor, we had a call yesterday. The best analogy that you used was, it's like cleaning off the window, right? Like you can now see through that window that has been kind of holding you back, rather than like having this big event, kind of life-changing event. It's more like, hey, you can see things a little bit more clearly than the things that you're going to have to actually look at and actually go into that, darkness, go into like I think it was Jung, right? Talked about finding that darkness, that shadow, and allowing it to come out and actually addressing what that is that's been holding you back. Is everybody's story is different. And you can't cookie cutter this process. It seems it's very personal. So yeah, thanks for sharing all that, Gordon.
A quick thing, Dave. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I talked to a lot of people in the psychedelic community in Canada, and someone asked me that the other week or month, but I don't even think I need psychedelics. Was the gift of it, was that like I have seen my operating system, and it is such a good drug to help, or medicine to get you squared away to a point where it's like, oh, I don't need to go do something to know when something's right or wrong in my life anymore. I'm like, you know what, man? Like, own it, respect it. Will the psychedelics help you? Yeah, it's a cheat code basically, but I'm not gonna have an excuse of, oh, I need it to get better. So just, that's really important to know, is that you should have some clarity coming out of these things, that you're not wanting to go to do them over and over and over again.
Right. It's not a crutch. It's a tool. And then it gets you to that next phase. So Trevor, what's the landscape look like now in Canada and the US, but more, let's start with Canada in terms of psychedelic treatment, and where are we at legislatively, and what are some of the things that you're seeing on the horizon for treatment with psychedelics?
For sure. Allow me permission to finish the big weave first. You asked about Ibogaine and 5-MeO. So I'll just touch on 5-MeO, which is it's a compound that comes from the Sonoran desert toad, and we use a synthetic version, but it's called bufo or sapo. or the toad or 5-MeO, and it's 5-methoxy-DMT, dimethyltryptamine. You just take a tiny small amount of it and vaporize it, and it's an incredibly powerful substance. It's more of a non-dualistic type experience, like Gordo mentioned, kind of the ego disillusion. I like to frame that as it's as if you are a drop of water or a drop of rain, and all of a sudden you get to experience yourself as the whole ocean for a few minutes. So it can be very powerful, very healing. And an Ibogaine provider in Mexico years ago had a 5-MeO provider working with them, and the 5-MeO provider saw how long it was taking people to recover after Ibogaine and suggested that maybe some 5-MeO would be helpful. And it turns out they do work really well together. So that's the protocol we use down here at Ambio in Tijuana. But we are in Tijuana because in Canada, the regulatory status of Ibogaine was that it was on the natural health products list. When I was able to legally work with it in Canada, it was a substance listed on the natural health products list, which is something like vitamin C or ginkgo biloba. They're going to show up on that list. So supplements that you can get over the counter and aren't potentially dangerous, whereas Ibogaine is potentially dangerous. So Health Canada realized that in 2017 and rescheduled it and put it on the prescription drug list. And it is currently on the prescription drug list in Canada, but because it has not gone through clinical trials, it's not available as a prescription, which is good. They didn't just make it illegal, it makes it available to study. But ironically, it's not as good when you're talking about all these illegal drugs that have been made available in Vancouver in a harm reduction basis. It doesn't really fit in that category because it's not completely illegal. I think I would have to look further into that. But essentially, I haven't been able to work with it in Canada since 2017. From that point, for a few years, instead, what I did in Canada was work with these nonprofits, MAPS Canada, where I served as chair. MAPS stands for the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. It has a little Canadian branch. And I helped co-found the Canadian Psychedelic Association in that time as well. And then around that time, I was introduced to Amber and Marcus Capone. They started the nonprofit Vets Incorporated, which is a nonprofit that has been sending U.S. Special Forces veterans down for this treatment. It was formed because Marcus Capone, a former Navy SEAL, he didn't really identify as having PTS. He loved his career. He loved what was happening for him in those 10 years of deploying. He really enjoyed his job. He didn't really feel as though he had a lot of stress around what happened while he was serving, but something wasn't working. And this goes back to the traumatic brain injury. So as a last ditch thing, he came to Mexico, where Ibogaine is not regulated. It is legal to work with this medicine in Mexico. And he had an Ibogaine treatment and it changed his life. So I met Amber and Marcus, and Amber was very diligent in being in touch with me after that to see if there might be a way for us to work together. So in 2021, I ended up in Tijuana with my two business partners, Jonathan and Jose. Jonathan ran that Ibogaine conference I mentioned in 2012. We'd stayed in touch since then. I was speaking to him about something else, happened to mention this veterans group that was keen to work with me. And he called me a week later with Jose in the car. Jose's a paramedic. He had a clinic running here providing Ibogaine mostly to detox people. So we decided to set up in Tijuana and focus on the veteran population. So that's a roundabout way of saying that it's not legal to work with it in Canada anymore. It is legal to work with it in Mexico, and it is Schedule 1, so completely illegal in the USA as well. There's a lot of initiatives in the US right now to try and get Ibogaine available stateside, though. The big one there is in Texas. Brian Hubbard and former Texas Governor Rick Perry are really spearheading that, along with that nonprofit Vets Incorporated, vetsolutions.org, who has sent now more than around 1,000 Special Forces veterans to us for this treatment.
Wow, that's incredible. So if a Canadian veteran is looking to start Ibogaine treatment, is it as simple as just reaching out to your clinic and being like, hey, I'm really curious. How do I get started? Is it as simple as
Yeah,
that?
as simple as that. Our website is ambio.life. Click apply now, and we have special pricing for veterans and first responders as well.
Okay, right. And I imagine the same thing for American veterans as well.
Yeah.
Do the same thing, and everybody ends up in Mexico is
Yeah.
essentially
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah,
understanding.
you fly into San Diego, we pick you up in San Diego, bring you down, take very good care of you for 5 days, and then
San
bring you back.
Diego. Cool.
There's coaching before and after as well. You mentioned the community.
Okay.
So for one,
Yeah.
we do bring people down in groups. We think that's great. So it is generally groups of veterans, groups of first responders together. There's coaching that's provided before and after to help you prepare and help you integrate afterwards. And then we have ongoing calls for people to show up on as well. Plus the fact that you're here in a group, a lot of those groups stay in touch and become dear friends after the fact as well.
Right. Right. To go back to the Sean Ryan show, I believe he just had the Secretary of Veterans Affairs on talking about the ineffectiveness of their suicide prevention programs that have spent something of somewhere in the lines of 2 point something billion, which hasn't changed the suicide rate in the veteran population. And I think just last year alone, I saw a Grunt Style post where it was like $500 and something million spent on suicide prevention, and it hasn't changed anything. So, I mean, from your perspective, are we at a point now that people are starting to recognize, and especially the veteran in the United States anyways, they're starting to recognize shit, like we can't keep on doing this. If the goal is to actually reduce and prevent suicides, and we keep on doing the same thing and spending all these billions of dollars and it's not changing, obviously there's got to be solutions out there that are not conventional. So we have to explore them. Do you think that's coming down the pipe in the
I
near
think
future?
they're waking up to it. I think the lobbying and the awareness that Amber Marcus and vets are doing, that is the mission of vets, is to end veteran suicide. And this works. I'll tell you that. We've had more people come in suicidal than you could imagine. And I almost don't want to jinx it. I'll knock on wood when I say, but there's nobody that's killed themselves that I know after coming through Ambio. And we keep pretty good tabs on that kind of thing. A great story is this guy, Mikey McKim. He shared his story. You can see it on the vet's website. But he is a Special Forces veteran. He was at the end of his line. He was actually driving to the beach, which was 3 hours away from his home, to kill himself. And a friend, divine timing, sent him the podcast of me on Sean Ryan, episode 30 of the Sean Ryan show. He listened to it on the drive there, and he decided he was going to try this instead. Came to us for treatment. He's now a vocal advocate for this treatment. He's been down and helped us host some of our groups and done support. And just complete 180, wants to live, wants to help other people live.
That's so inspiring. Gordon, what are some I guess final thoughts for a veteran who might be on the fence, listening to maybe this podcast and not doing well, maybe at the end of their rope, but going and doing psychedelics just seems out of their wheelhouse? What would you say to that veteran that, is just not quite there, but definitely needs to do something?
Well, I would tell him they have to make the decision to commit, and it's the best investment they will ever make. Especially if you've been medically released, you've been given a bunch of money, and we all want things just given to us. I paid my own money to go do that treatment.
That's a great point.
Take the ownership, use it to supersize your life, because you can. Not only will it get you out of the hole you're in, but if you do the right post-integration and the work, you can turn your life around. You can accomplish so much more. So is it worth it? Yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sometimes you gotta cough up a few bucks and go to the ceremony, go to the treatment. It's not going to always be paid for by Veterans Affairs. And if anything, right, especially in the business world, right, you got to pay to play, essentially, because it means that you're invested, like literally and emotionally, to the process. When you're given something, you don't have the same emotional connection to it. When you pay,
Right.
You pay attention. And And I mean, in terms of investment, what's more important than your life and your health? Nothing. So making that few $1,000 investment has almost infinite potential down the road. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a very important insight. And Trevor, what are some final thoughts, just wrapping up this episode here for folks that are curious about Ambio and anything else that might be of interest for somebody that's considering psychedelic therapy?
I think it's important. We've been speaking a lot about veterans here, and that's important. And sometimes I've learned over the years that when we're talking about veterans and hard charging special operators, that people say, well, that's not me. And they kind of close the door on themselves as something that this might help them with, or at this as something that might help them. And that's just not the case. If you feel the call, everybody is welcome down here. We have treated a lot of veterans' spouses. A lot of wives have come down because once their husbands are finally better, a great metaphor I heard once is it's like the woman has been the flagpole while the veteran has been the flag blowing in the wind with all the crap they've been going through. Then the veteran gets back and they're solid. And all of a sudden it gives the woman the opportunity to blow in the wind, and she realizes, wow, I've got some stuff to take care of as well. So it's been beautiful having so many spouses of veterans come down. You mentioned the movie In Waves and War. That's not out yet on a large scale. It's doing a few film festivals now. It's a great movie. It follows 3 Navy SEALs through aspects of this process. Marcus Capone, DJ Shipley, and Matty Roberts. Incredible movie. The Ibogaine journeys are animated. It's really well done. Cool. That should be on a major streaming service by the end of the summer. Negotiations are still in place for that. So definitely check that out when you can. And I would just, if you feel the call, make it happen, especially if it comes down to I'm going to kill myself, then you got to do everything you can, sell whatever it takes to make it down for a treatment like this, because the other option is dismal. Trust me.
Yeah, I agree. We've lost far too many friends over the last few decades, and it's time to put an end to it. And this has just been an incredible conversation, guys. Real education for me, and I'm sure the folks that are listening right now are getting an education as well. So we'll put all the links that we just talked about here in the description. And folks, I really encourage you, if this is something that appeals to you, like reach out. The link will be here. I've been on my journey as well. There's every resource out there to get better, to get healthy, but you need to ultimately make that decision on your own. It's not Veterans Affairs or the VA is going to make it for you. So, gentlemen, thanks so much for your insights. This has been amazing, and continued success in the future. I'd love to have a further conversation down the road with you and give us some updates as to how things are going at Ambio, and Gordon, what you're up to as well. It's pretty interesting stuff. So folks, don't forget, train hard, fight easy. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.